History is what you say is unsettled business. You think it's settled only to unravel itself, revealing another side, another story. This story is about a man named Estevanico, a black Moorish slave turned faith healer, and eventually conquistador. Into the Southwest United States, his life and journey are documented by three men: Cabeza de Vaca, Fray Marcos de Niza, and Pedro de Castaneda. In Cabeza de Vacas, La Relación y Comentarios, or Naufragios y Comentarios, of 1544, he is recorded as one of the four survivors of the failed Narvaez Expedition on a journey back to New Spain. Fray Marcos de Niza noted Estevanico as the co-leader of an expedition into the Southwest in his relation of 1539, as well as his death. Pedro de Castaneda, a soldier of the famous Coronado Expedition, confirmed Estevanico's death in the Journey of Coronado from 1540 to 1542. I will be using plenty of excerpts from these books to paint a picture of this story. There was also a movie created about the Narvaez Expedition called Cabeza de Vaca, which I will be using a few scenes from. It does a great job of showing the emotions of the journey, but the actual story and representing the natives, well, a big no. Cabeza notes that he did not see any signs of idolatry or even witchcraft. He also did not learn how to heal from witchcraft like the movie entails. The movie also dramatizes the events and presentation of the natives. The Narvaez Expedition only lasted a year, from 1527 to 1528, and was led by Panfilo de Narvaez, who was appointed by King Charles V as the Adelantado, a governor of a region. He previously was sent to Mexico to overthrow Hernán Cortés, the man who conquered the Aztecs, but was outmaneuvered, lost an eye, and imprisoned for 3.5 years. He was battle-ready and determined to carve out his own. Leaving the port of Sanlúcar de Barrameda, Spain, with 600 troops in total, some Spanish and Portuguese, others Italians, and a few mixed Africans. Slaves, servants, and the wives of some of the troops also came, but they would not touch the sands of western Florida until April 1528. Between this time, they would have stopped in Hispaniola and Cuba to retrieve more supplies. They instead lost men due to other more lucrative opportunities, fear, and a hurricane delaying their departure. One of the reasons they lost soldiers may have been meeting survivors of a failed colony in North America. In the Georgia and Carolina region, the first known European colony in North America was erected from 1526 to 1527, called San Miguel de Gualdape, led and funded partially by the Spanish explorer Lucas Vázquez de Ayllón. Ayllón was a wealthy sugar plantation owner in Hispaniola and the mayor of the town La Concepcion. He planned to start a settlement of his own and establish trade with the natives. What he received was confrontation from the natives, cold weather, hunger, sickness that would eventually kill him, and infighting. To top it all off, the San Miguel de Gualdape slave rebellion in 1526 became the first known African slave rebellion in the would-be United States. Around 150 of the original 600 settlers were able to return to Hispaniola and told others of their tragic stories. This could have contributed to the dissolution of nearly 200 men from the Narvaez Expedition. Eventually, they arrived in Florida with around 400 men, 5 ships, and 80 horses. They unload their ships in Florida miles outside their intended landing site, which was Tampa Bay. While anchoring on the west side of Florida, Narvaez and his men came across an empty village, noting,
"One of the villages was so large it could hold more than 300 people. The others were smaller, and we found a golden ladle among the fishnets. The next day the governor raised the standards in behalf of your majesty and took possession of the country in your royal name. He showed his credentials and was acknowledged as governor according to your majesty's commands."
Raising standards meant reciting the requerimiento, written in 1510, on the land they claimed to be an ultimatum to the natives, saying,
"Wherefore, as best we can, we ask and require you that you consider what we have said to you. Acknowledge the Church as the ruler and superior of the whole world, and the high priest called Pope. If you do so, you will do well, and that which you are obliged to do to their highnesses, and we in their name shall receive you in all love and charity, and shall leave you, your wives, and your children, and your lands, free without servitude. But, if you do not do this, we shall powerfully enter into your country, and shall make war against you in all ways and manners that we can, and shall subject you to the yoke and obedience of the church and of their highnesses. We shall take you and your wives and your children, and shall make slaves of them, and as such shall sell and dispose of them as their highnesses may command.
Eventually, they disembark and find another village. The men amongst the expedition discussed with Narvaez how to proceed, being that they were unprepared. Cabeza advised to find better land to settle on due to the pilots arguing, horses and equipment unusable, and no translators. Instead, they send a ship and around 180 men to find a port, and if not to return to Cuba, they never saw them again. With the remaining men and supplies, they journeyed into Florida. In one village they
found many cargo boxes from Castle. In each was a corpse, each corpse covered with painted deerskins. The commissary believed this to be some idolatrous practice, so he burned the crates with the corpses inside. We also found pieces of canvas and cloth, and feather headdresses that seemed to be from New Spain. We also found traces of gold.
They came across various natives belonging to Timucua, the largest native group in Florida at that time. They were told of a province called Apalachee with better supplies and even gold, saying,
We asked 3 Indians with us, who were their neighbors and enemies, about the land's condition and settlements, the quality of its people, about supplies, and many other things. Each answered individually, on his own, that Appalachia was the largest of all the towns, that further in one encountered fewer people who were very much poorer than those here, and that the country was sparsely populated, the inhabitants greatly scattered, and that further inland one encountered big lakes, dense forests, great deserts, and wastelands.
Upon reaching Apalachee, they found food but nothing valuable in their eyes. Their next destination became Aute, but made enemies along the way, being constantly attacked when alone, and are fetching water, describing,
All the Indians from Florida we encountered were great archers and, being very tall and naked, at a distance seem like giants. They are wonderfully built, very thin, strong, and agile. Their bows are as thick as an arm, from 11 to 12 spans long, and shoot an arrow at 200 paces with an erring arm.
After months of hunger, fighting, and sickness, they decided to leave. They made 5 boats from the horses they killed, their clothes, and various other materials by raiding the natives of Aute while being constantly under attack by them. They made water bags made from their dead horses, and set out to sea toward Panuco, Mexico with around 250 men, 50 men for each boat. While sailing for nearly a month hugging the coast, they meet various tribes helping them with supplies and some attacking them. They continued to sail along the coast until realizing one morning the current of the Mississippi River swept the boats away from shore. After days of fighting the current and facing a storm, only 2 boats out of the 5, one led by Alonso del Castillo and the other led by Cabeza de Vaca, crashed onto Galveston Island. The rest of the boats and the men were lost, never to regroup again. Narvaez would later die at sea, too weak to sail back to shore. The survivors under de Vaca would lose everything and meet sympathetic natives who wept with them for their losses and tribulations and brought them to their home, noting that,
When we got to their dwellings, we saw they had built a hut for us with a great many fires in it. About an hour after our arrival, they began to dance. Their celebration lasted the whole night. We expected to be sacrificed. In the morning they again gave us fish and roots, and treated us so well that we were reassured, losing to some extent our apprehension of being sacrificed.
they eventually meet up with the other boat of survivors on the island and tried to repair their boats, but failed, and decided to stay there until winter, writing,
Since the villages afforded so little shelter, 5 Christians quartered on the coast were driven to such extremes that they ate each other, until but one man, who, being left alone, had no one to eat him. The Indians were so startled at this, if they had seen this at the beginning, we all would have been in great danger. Out of 80 men, only 15 remained alive. Then the natives fell sick from a stomach ailment, so that half of them died as well. They believed that we had killed them, and were, in fact, certain of it, so they agreed among themselves to kill those of us who had survived. But when they came to execute their plan, an Indian who had been keeping me told them not to believe we were the cause of these deaths, for if we had so much power we would not have allowed so many of our own people to die. and that none of us did any harm or injury. It pleased our Lord they should listen to his advice and counsel.
This was when Cabeza was taught how to be a healer.
They wanted to make medicine men of us without any examination or asking for our diplomas, because they cure diseases by breathing on the sick, and with their breath and their hands they drive the ailment away. They summoned us to do the same in order to be at least of some use. We laughed, taking it as a joke, and said that we did not understand how to cure people. Thereupon they withheld our food to compel us to do what they wanted. Seeing our obstinacy, an Indian told me that I did not know what I was talking about when I claimed that what he knew was useless, because stones and things growing in the field have their virtues, and he, with a heated stone, placing it on the stomach, could effect cures and take away pain, so that we, who were wiser men, surely had greater power and virtue. Their manner of curing people is as follows: when one is ill they call in a medicine man, and after they are well again not only do they give him all they own, but even things they strive to obtain from their relatives. All the medicine man does is to make a few cuts where the pain is located and then suck the skin around the incisions. They cauterize with fire, believing it to be very effective, which through my own experience I also found to be true. Then they breathe on the spot where the pain. The way we treated the sick was to make the sign of the cross over them while breathing on them, recite a Pater Noster and Ave Maria, and pray to God, our Lord, as soon as we made the cross over them. All those for whom we prayed told the others they were cured and felt well again.
Out of the 15 survivors, only Cabeza, Lope de Oviedo, and Alanis stayed permanently on the island due to sickness, with Alanis eventually dying, while the other 12 men left for the mainland and were distributed among other tribes or killed. Cabeza would eventually become a trader, allowing him to freely move throughout the land, previously being a chattel slave. Cabeza learned of other Christians from the natives he encountered and decided to search for them, while Oviedo stayed on the island and befriended a few native women. Cabeza meet up with Andres Dorantes, Alonso del Castillo, and Estevanico, Dorantes' enslaved Moor. They learned of each other's journey and planned their escape for the next 6 months, and eventually escaped during the harvest of prickly pears. He also documented the first description of
cows, which I have seen 3 times. They appear to me of the size of those in Spain. Their horns are small, like those of the Moorish cattle, their hair is very long. Some are brownish and others black, and to my taste they have better and more meat than those from here. From the smaller ones, the Indians make blankets to cover themselves, and from the larger they make shoes and shells. These cows come from the north, across the country further on, to the coast of Florida, and are found all over the land for over 400 leagues.
the men who escaped were Alonso del Castillo Maldonado. The son of impoverished nobility, Castillo decided to make his fortune in the New World. Castillo being deeply pious, he is credited with introducing Christianized faith healing to the natives. He would later stay in New Spain with his new fortune. His death is unrecorded. Andres Dorantes de Carranza. The son of a minor nobleman, Pablo Dorantes, he sought his fortune in the New World, taking his Moorish slave, Estevanico, with him. He stayed in New Spain, married 2 widows, Maria de la Torre and Paula Dorantes, fathered more than 14 children, and died in the 1550s. Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca. He was a proto-anthropologist of Native America. He was the treasurer and the master-at-arms, with the authority to place people under arrest, during the expedition being the highest-ranked officer below Narvaez himself. During the aftermath of the expedition, he was known as a reliable member who showed leadership, sympathy, and respect for his men and the natives. He would later return to Spain asking for Narvaez's title to the province of Florida, but it was awarded to Hernando de Soto. In 1540, he was appointed governor of New Andalusia in South America and wrote an account of his travels, first published in 1542. He was eventually sent back to Spain and died. He was buried near his grandfather's grave, Pedro de Vera, who conquered the Canary Islands, Estevanico. He first appears as a slave sold in Azmir, Morocco, to a Spanish nobleman around the early 1520s, and then sold to Andres Dorante. It is unclear that he was raised Muslim, but he would have eventually had to convert to Catholicism if allowed on the journey in 1527. They escaped to the Avares tribe, describing them as
none of them know how to reckon decisions by either sun or moon, nor do they count by months and years. They judge decisions by the evening of fruit, by the time that fish die, and by the appearance of the stars. And in all of this they are very clever and expert. Their dwellings and their food are like those of the others we had known, but they are much more prone to hunger, having neither corn nor acorns or walnuts. We always went naked like them and at night covered ourselves with deerskins.
With the Avares, they honed their skills and accolades. Castillo and Cabeza were doing most of the healing at first. But eventually all four became expert healers, explaining.
Some Indians came to Castillo planning that their Hechate clan begging him for relief. At the very moment he had made the sign of the cross over them and commended them to God, the Indians said that all the pain was gone, and each brought a piece of venison. And there were so many that we did not know where to store the meat. At night they returned, saying that the dead man whom I attended to in their presence had resuscitated, risen from his bed, walked about, eaten, and talked to them, and that everyone I had treated was well and in very good spirits. All over the land nothing else was spoken of. Everyone who heard about it came to us so that we might care them and bless their children. We remained with the Avares for 8 months. People came to us from far and wide and said that we were truly the children of the sun. Until then Dorantes and the Negro had not cared anyone. But we found ourselves suppressed by the Indians coming from all sides that all of us had to become medicine men. I was the most daring and reckless of all in undertaking chaos. We never treated anyone that did not afterwards say he was well, and they had such confidence in our skill that they believed that none of them would die as long as we were among them.
While traveling, they also received information of the other Christian survivors who were living with the people of the Fig. They continued to travel and meet other tribes healing their sick. More customs were noted about child rearing, marriage, dispute settlements, and the way they fight. Analyzing that,
their bowstrings are made of deer sinews. They fight in a crouch, and while shooting at each other they talk and dart from side to side to dodge their foes' arrows. Because of this our crossbows and arquebuses will do them little damage. They are only good in narrow areas and in swamps. Horses are what the Indians dread most, and the means by which they will be overcome. Whoever has to fight Indians must take great care not to let them think he is disheartened or that he covets what they own. In what they must be treated very harshly, for should they notice either fear or greed, as a people they know how to bide their time waiting for revenge and take carry from their enemies, fears. After using up all their arrows, they part, each going his own way, without attempting pursuit. Many times they are shot all over their bodies with arrows, but they do not die from the wounds as long as their bowels or heart is not affected.
they were eventually given females guides from another tribe due to the current trailhead disappearing into the landscape. On the journey, they noted,
At sunset we reached 100 Indian huts and, as we approached, the people came out to welcome us, slapping their thighs and shouting frightfully. They carried gourds into which they had bored holes, which they then filled with pebbles, which are ceremonial objects of great importance. They only use them at dances or to perform cures. They claim they come from heaven, since they are not found in that country. Nor do they know where the gourds come from, only that the rivers carry them downstream when they rise and flood the land. They brought us their sick who, after we had made the sign of the cross over them, said they were healed, and everyone who did not get well still believed we might cure him. They all rejoiced at what those we had treated told them and danced so much that they would not let us sleep. During the whole journey we were very worried by the number of people following us. We could not escape them, although we tried, because they were so anxious to touch us. And as soon as we arrived those with us would sack the houses of the others, but as the latter knew of the custom before our coming, they each some of their chattels, and, after welcoming us with a great deal of rejoicing, they took out the things they had concealed and presented them to us, beads and ochre, and several little bags of silver. We, following the custom, immediately turned the gifts over to the Indians who had come in our company, and after they had given us these presents they began their dances and celebrations, and sent 4 others from another nearby village to come and look at us. In the afternoon they all came and brought us beads, bows, and other little things, which we also distributed.
They interacted with various tribes of 2 distinct cultures, which were prominent before the horse in America. Tribes like those of the Native Americans in the plains and the Puebloans. The natives of the plains were at first hunters and gatherers of the patrilineal side. They lived in small family groups, were sparsely populated and followed their prey and moved with the seasons. During certain times of the year, all the tribes would convene during an annual event like a harvest or celestial event to interact, trade, and conduct religious events. Their religion mainly consisted of shamans and religious sites. People of the patrilineal line would go on to create cities on the world. The introduction of the horse changed society into a nomadic one, following the herds and conquering others, becoming the warlords and kings of the area. The Puebloans, on the other, were and continue to be of the matrilineal line, being agricultural, static, and the religions surrounding the earth, moon, and death cults. Horses did not affect their culture, but made them accessible to attack from the nomadic plains natives. There was a third culture, nomadic, which followed the herds of buffalo using dogs, but was not as impactful as the post-horse nomadic tribes. The plains natives, being followers of shamans, followed these four men and deemed them as holy and children of the sun, noticing that
they already knew that, wherever we arrived, the people would be robbed and plundered by those in our company. Seeing us alone, they lost their fear, and gave us prickly pears, though nothing else. Since the people had thought they were safe, they weren't prepared and had neither time nor place to hide anything. The robbers told them that we were children of the sun and had the power to cure the sick or kill them. They told the lies. They also enjoined them to treat us with great reverence, be careful not to arouse our wrath, to give us all their possessions, and to guide us to where there were many people, and that wherever we should come to they should steal and rob everything the others had, which was the custom. They went back and left us with these Indians, who, mindful of what the others had said, began to treat us with the same respect and awe. We traveled in their company for 3 days. They took us to where there were many Indians, and went ahead to tell them of our coming, repeating what they had heard as well as adding to it. As we neared the villages, all the inhabitants came out to welcome us. 2 of their medicine men gave us gourds. From there onward we carried gourds, which greatly added to our authority since they hold these ceremonial objects in high regard. Our companions sacked the dwellings, but since there were many houses and they only few in number, they could not carry away all they took, so that more than half was left to waste.
they continued to see signs of wealth, noting,
Andrés Dorantes got a large copper rattle on which a face was represented. They claimed to have brought it from the north. We understood that wherever it might have come from there must be foundries and that metal was cast in molds.
Cabeza conducted a surgery among the Pueblons as well, saying,
Here they brought me a man who had been shot through the right side of the back with an arrow, the head of which stuck close to his heart. By cutting deeper and inserting the point of the knife, with great effort I removed it, with a deer bone. According to my knowledge of surgery, I made 2 stitches. After I had extracted the arrow they begged me for it and I gave it to them. Among these Indians, all over the country, these care gave us as much fame as they were capable of conceiving and respecting. We showed them our rattle, and they told us that where it had come from there were a great many seeds of the same metal buried, that it was something they valued highly, and that there were permanent dwellings there. We believe it is near the South Sea, for we always heard that sea was richer than that of the north.
At times during the travel, death became apparent and shifted the attitude amongst the band of natives, writing,
In truth, we were very much concerned about it, for seeing this great mortality. We dreaded that all of them might die or desert us in their terror, while those further on, up and learning of it, would avoid us. We prayed to God our Lord to assist us and the sick began to get well.
Castillo and Estevanico were sent ahead to scout out new villages with the women as guides, and came across settled tribes in permanent houses, the pueblos inscribing.
Castillo also said that the Negro was coming to meet us on the way, nearby, with all the people of the houses. For that reason we started out, and after going a league and a half met the Negro and the people that came to welcome us, who gave us beans and many squashes to eat, gourds to carry watering, cowhide rows, and other things, 6 leagues beyond. When night was already approaching, reached their houses, where they received us with great celebration.
They were then instructed to follow the trail of corn to get back to New Spain. While traveling, they meet another tribe, with more signs of wealth in the area, writing,
They presented Dorantes with 5 emeralds shaped like arrow points, the arrows of which they use in their feasts and dances. Because they seemed to be of very good quality, I asked where they got them, and they said they came from some very high mountains toward the north, where they traded feather brushes and parrot plumes for them. They also said that there were villages with many people and big houses there.
Estevanico at this time, and most likely other times, was used as their main source of communication with the natives, though they knew how to communicate as well writing.
We had the Negro talk to them all the time. He inquired about the road we should follow, the villages, in short, about everything we wished to know. When we asked they would answer by signs, as if they spoke our tongue and we theirs for. Although we spoke 6 languages, we encountered more than 8,000 different ones. In order to meet us, those at would immediately make peace and become friendly to each other.
Through this, Cabeza realized the might was useless compared to compassion and charity amongst the people, noticing that
they were so well inclined that, had there been a language in which we could have made ourselves perfectly understood, we would have left them all Christians. All this we gave them to understand as clearly as possible. Afterward, when the sun rose, with great shouts they would lift their clasped hands to heaven and then pass them all over their bodies. They did the same thing at sunset.
eventually they saw signs of other Spaniards, noting,
Castillo saw, on the neck of an Indian, a little buckle from a sword belt, and in it was sewed a horse channel. He took it from the Indian and asked who had brought it, and they answered that some men had come from heaven to that river, that they had horses, lances, and swords, and had launched 2 of them. And they replied that they had gone to sea, putting their lances into the water and then going into it themselves, and that afterward they saw them on top of the waves moving towards sunset. Finally, having such positive notice of them, we hastened onward, always finding more traces of the Christians, and told the Indians that we were now sure to find the Christians and would tell them not to kill Indians or make slaves of them nor take them away from their homelands, or do any other harm.
Eventually they found the Spaniards, describing that
their surprise was so great that they could not find words to ask me anything. Thereupon we had many and bitter quarrels with the Christians, for they wanted to make slaves of our Indians. And we grew so angry at it that at our departure we forgot to take along many bows, pouches, and arrows, as well as the 5 emeralds, so they were left and lost to us. We gave the Christians a great many cobskin ropes and other objects, and had a great deal of trouble in persuading the Indians to return home and plant their crops in peace. They insisted on accompanying us until, according to their custom, we should be in custody of the Indians. As long as we were with them, they had no fear of the Christians. The Christians were greatly vexed by all this and told their own interpreter to say to the Indians how we were of their own days. The Indians paid little attention to all this talk. They talked among themselves, saying that the Christians lied, for we had come from sunrise, while they had come from where the sun sets, that we cured the sick, while they had killed those who were healthy, that we went naked and barefoot, whereas they wore clothes and went on horseback and carried lances. Also, we asked for nothing, but gave away all we were presented with, while they seemed to have no damn done to steal what they called, and never gave anything to anybody. In short, they recalled all our deeds, and praised them highly, contrasting them with the conduct of the others. We went on with the idea of ensuring the Indians freedom, but just when we believed we had achieved this, the opposite took place. In fact, prevented us from seeing what the Christians were doing. They had planned to fall upon the Indians we had sent back in their imagined security and in peace.
arriving in Culiacan, they met the chief magistrate and were saddened by what became of the natives. They urged 2 captives to retrieve some of them. Only another tribe came and were asked about their religion, saying,
Upon being asked whom they worshipped and to whom they offered sacrifices, to whom they prayed for health and water for the fields of corn, they said, to a man in heaven. We asked what was his name, and they said Awar, and that they believed he had created the world and everything in it, and they said their fathers and grandfathers had told them and they had known it for a very long time. We explained that this being of whom they spoke was the same one we called God, and that thereafter they should give him that name, and worship and serve him as we commanded. They replied that they understood us thoroughly and would do as we had said. We ordered them to build churches and put crosses in them. The children of the chiefs to be baptized. Then the captain played himself before God not to make a raid or allow one to be made or to capture slaves from the people, and in the country, we had set at peace again. He promised to keep and fulfill this vow until His Majesty and the Governor, Nuño de Guzman, or the Viceroy, in his name, ordained something better.
Unfortunately, Nuño de Guzman was infamous for his suppression of the native people. In the words of his biographer, Donald Chipman, he has been depicted as the personification of the black legend, anti-Spanish and anti-Catholic propaganda. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, one of Cortes's loyal supporters, described him in the following terms. In all the provinces of New Spain, there was not another man more foul and evil than Guzman of Panuco. Another biographer, Santana, describes his personality as characterized by cruelty of the highest order, ambition without limit, a refined hypocrisy, great immorality, ingratitude without equal, and a fierce hatred for Cortés. Relations with the natives came to a closing when,
15 days after our arrival, Alcaraz came in with the Christians who had been on that raid and told the captain how the Indians had come down from the mountains and settled on the plain and that villages formerly deserted were now well populated. That the Indians had come out to welcome them with crosses in their hands, had taken them to their houses, had given them some of what they had, and how they had slept the night there. The Indians who said they felt secure, he ordered that no harm be done to them, and with this they departed. These people became willingly and sincerely subjects of the true Lord.
while some relationships were mended, others were corrupted by conquistadors like Guzman, who terrorized them. Later, the settlers began to complain to Antonio de Mendoza, then the Viceroy of New Spain, about Guzman's cruelty. Unlike the movie Cabeza, it is recorded that,
in the 2000 leagues we traveled, on land, and by boats, and in the 10 months more after our rescue from captivity, nowhere did we come up neither sacrifices or idolatry.
many tribes were recorded along their journey. Tribes that may have been lost to time, such as the Cuchendados, the Charuco, the Deguanes, the Cuevanes, the Marianis, the Guaycones, the Iguaches, the Atayos, the Decubadaos, the Quitoles, the Chavavares, the Maliacones, the Coltalchulches, the Susolas, the Comos, the Camolas, the people of the Figs, and more. All lost to disease that would ravage their society in just a few years. They were saved by these foreign medicine men, only to be killed after they left them. Upon returning to New Spain, Cabeza went to Spain and learned of the whereabouts of the crew that sailed back to get gear at the beginning of the journey from Florida. Castillo and Dorantes stayed in New Spain, with the Viceroy asking Andres Dorantes to assist in a follow-up expedition. But Dorantes declined, but agreed to sell Estevanico to the Viceroy because of his extensive knowledge of the land, people, language, and willingness to lead an expedition. The expedition was led by Estevanico and a Franciscan priest, Fray Marcos de Niza. The objective was to find the 7 cities of Cibola, the land to the north with permanent houses, molds for the casting of copper, and an emerald and gold supply beyond one's imagination. These legendary cities came from the information told to the 4 wanderers during their journey.
I sent Stephen Durant, the Black. See if by that route you would be able to learn of any great thing, send me Indians with the signal. Which we arranged, that if the thing was of moderate importance, he send me white cross the size of a hand. If it was something great, he send me one of 2 hands. And if it was something bigger and better than New Spain, he send me large cross. 4 days there came messengers from Stephen with a very large cross, of the height of a man.
A few years later, during the Coronado Expedition, they conducted an investigation into the previous expedition and the passing of Estevanico, stating,
The Negro did not get on well with the friars, because he took the women that were given him and collected turquoises, and got together a stock of everything. Besides, the Indians in those places through which they went, got along with the Negro Beta, because they had seen him before. This was the reason he was sent on ahead to open up the way and pacify the Indians.
When Estevanico reached the Zuni pueblo of Hawiku, the first of the 7 cities of Cibola, his luck ran out with
An Indian son of a chief among those who had gone in the company of Stephen, told him that at one jornada before reaching Cibola, Stephen sent messengers with his calabash, as he was accustomed to send notice. They heard that the Lord had placed there, and gave him the calabash, e, as soon as he took it and saw the cascabelos, with Majos and flung the calabash to the ground and told the messengers to be gone immediately, saying that he knew what people those were, otherwise all would be killed. The messengers returned and told Stephen what had passed. He told them that was nothing. He reached the city of Cibola, where he found that the people would not consent for him to enter with him. They placed him in a large house that was outside the city, and presently took from him all that he carried. The next day in the morning this Indian was thirsty and left the house. He saw Stephen running away, and after him followed the people of the city, and they killed some of those who were with him.
In his report to Mendoza, Fray Marcos said that he continued north until he could see Hawiku or Cibola, but did not enter the pueblo, writing,
It has a very beautiful appearance of a town, the best that I've seen in these parts. They are those from the way the Indians told me, all made of stone with their leftovers. The population is larger than the city of Mexico. Sometimes I was tempted to go to where, because I knew that I was only venturing my life.
His report inspired the Coronado Expedition. When they reached Hawiku, they learned that Fray Marcos lied about the supply the area held, and asked the chief about Estevanico's fate. The Zunis said that,
For 3 days they made inquiries about him and held a council. The account which the Negro gave them of 2 white men who were following him, sent by a great lord, who knew about the sins in the sky, made them think he must be a spy or a guide from some nations who wished to come and conquer them. It seemed to them unreasonable to say that the people were white in the country from which he came and that he sent by them, he being black. They thought it was hard of him to ask them for turquoises and women, and so they decided to kill him. The death of the Negro is perfectly certain, because many of the sins which he wore have been found, and the Indians say that they killed him here because the Indians of Chichilticale said that he was a bad man. He assaulted their women, whom the Indians love better than themselves.
from a slave to a healer to an official explorer, he is a testimony against the 1619 Project, which I still see making an impact on the American psyche. They believe America started in 1619 when 30 enslaved Africans arrived in Jamestown as Britain's first permanent settlement, saying,
help us understand the genesis of this, how long you've been thinking about this, how long you've been thinking about changing our notions of the start of this country, moving it from 1776 to 1619.
So I first came across the year, the date, 1619, as a high school student. And I came across it in a book called Before the Mayflower. And I just remember it as a student being astounded because I had never been taught that enslaved people, that people of African descent had been here even before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock. So I've been obsessed with that period for a long time. And as the anniversary was approaching, I really thought that this was an opportunity to finally examine in an institution like the Times, the legacy of what it means to be a country that was founded in slavery and where, you know, this is the 400th anniversary of that institution.
I want my students to think critically about the information they consume and to never accept anything as fact. And the 1619 Project, to me, was filling a gap that exists in the curriculum.
For the past 2 years, she's used excerpts in her history and English classes.
It's personal for a lot of students. There were times when people had to walked out the room, getting in arguments with each other, but it's the conversations that we had afterwards to repair harm, to process what had happened, that I think was a huge learning point for a lot of us.
The students have even taken what they've learned to enact change.
They have seen through the 1619 Project, I too can use my voice to not just identify injustices, but take action and rally others around that action as well.
Is absolutely astounding because, like you, I didn't learn any of this, right? I never learned any of this in school. Anything that I was taught about African Americans, about slavery, was always just like a bookmark, right? It was never a story to be told, and it is one that we consistently hide from. And not only do we hide from it, we pretend it does not exist. We pretend, as when Mitch McConnell was asked about reparations, it's like, but we gave you a black president, so you should be okay with that, right? We are people that have persistently been oppressed and depressed by the American democratic system, and yet we're never allowed to question it.
My question is, why reduce the African experience in the would-be United States to enslaved Africans sent to the British colonies? And mind you, laws that would eventually make slavery in America race-based would not flourish until after the 1660s, when the Virginia General Assembly proclaimed any child born of an Englishman and an African woman be free or slave, depending on the status of the mother. Estevanico's story and others like Anthony Johnson and Elizabeth Key support the historical evidence of slavery being a system where the enslaved could either not be negatively affected by that title, like the former, or become free legally, or by birth, such as the latter. This does not mean there wasn't discrimination, but it does mean that slavery was more fluid before the 1660s. Even the founder of the 1619 Project, Nicole Hannah-Jones, agrees. The crazy thing is, the 1619 Project is using history and reporting to make an argument. It never pretended to be a history. We explicitly state our aims and produced a series of essays. Critique was always expected, but the need to discredit it speaks to something else. These accounts discuss more than just the dynamics of slavery and early colonialism, but also the religion of the natives, ideas like primitive monotheism, and greed furthering exploration. You can see the human condition take fold from natives following those they saw as children of the sun, to how disease may have first taken hold in North America. This is the last and only recordings of tribes now lost to history, from the memory of a man who with respect wrote down their culture, while also documenting the greatest African of America. If you like the video, please subscribe and spread this incredible story.
Contar mentiras. Como ella. Estebanico. ¿Por qué no contamos la historia?